Birmingham, a city well known for its abundance of canals, but despite having a sea life centre, it is nowhere near the coast. Barmouth, on the mid-Wales coast, is around 115 miles away, at least a 2.5 hour drive. But how about cycling to the coast from Birmingham? Well, in today's video, I'm going to show you how you can cycle from Birmingham all the way to the coast at Barmouth. Along the way, we're going to use some of that famous canal network around Birmingham. We're going to use some quiet lanes and some roads that take us through some absolutely stunning countryside. And it wouldn't be a Cycling Nate video without using a few disused rail lines along the way. So join me for what I think is the best cycling route from Birmingham to the coast. The route starts opposite the National Sea Life Centre on the banks of the Birmingham Main Line Canal, which runs between Wolverhampton and Birmingham. And we're going to use the towpath of this canal for our first leg towards Wolverhampton, which forms part of Route 5 of the National Cycle Network. As you can imagine, not being far from the city centre, this section of towpath can get quite busy. So do be careful as you go down here, and a bell is a must. After passing under a couple of bridges, the canal takes on a different character from what it was in the city centre. You can see there seems to be a bit more space here, and although you can tell you're still in an urban area, you don't feel as closed in as you did at the start of the ride. After passing under the Birmingham Inner Ring Road, you'll notice that the canal becomes absolutely arrow straight. And if we look at a map of this section of canal, we can see a couple of curious canal loops coming off this very straight section of canal. The original canal, designed by James Brindley, followed the lay of the land as much as possible, so meandered its way out of Birmingham through the Black Country and to Wolverhampton, with quite a few locks along the way and only a towpath on one side. By 1824 it was apparent that something better was needed. Thomas Telford was appointed chief engineer to improve the canal between Birmingham and Wolverhampton. He used huge embankments, large cuttings and tunnels to create a much straighter route to Wolverhampton, cutting over 7 miles off the route, also significantly widening the canal and adding a towpath to both sides most of the way. This canal was the motorway of the 1800s, and it cut through the route of the old canal, creating these curious loops off the main line. It's because of this, the way that this new main line was built, that you can expect to cross quite a few junctions on the canal. So there's a lot of these little bridges to traverse as we make our way up Route 5. Because of these many canal loops and the extensive canal network in Birmingham, you may have heard people refer to Birmingham as the Venice of the North.
People from Birmingham are always saying it's the Venice of the North.
When we reach Smethwick, it looks as if the canal splits into two, with a left and right fork. In fact, the right fork is the original route of the James Brindley Canal, which goes up and over the Smethwick summit using a number of locks. The route on the left is Thomas Telford's new route, which uses a large cutting to make its way through the Smethwick summit, getting rid of the need for any locks and thus speeding up traffic flow through this section. We cross the old canal here on a bridge that was put in by Thomas Telford as part of the improvements to the canal here. It was cast just up the road in Tipton at Horsley Ironworks and is Grade 2 listed. The Garmin Connect and Commute links for this route are in the video description, so no need to worry about getting lost at these junctions. And if you want to say thank you for the route, you can buy me a beer via the link in the description also. As we head into the cutting that Thomas Telford created, we come across more of his handiwork crossing over the top. This is the engine arm aqueduct, built by Thomas Telford out of cast iron to carry yet another canal over the top of this cutting. It's one of many iron aqueducts that Telford created. Not far from the engine arm aqueduct, we begin to approach the Galton Tunnel. This is the first of two tunnels that we pass through on our way to Wolverhampton. This first one is much shorter than the second, and as you may have guessed by the use of concrete in its construction, it's also a rather modern addition to the canal. It was put in the 1970s, when the cutting was infilled to accommodate a much wider road over the top of the canal than that had previously been there. And although Thomas Telford was long gone at this point, the road over the top was named after him, Telford Way, just if you needed any more reminding that he was instrumental in this canal and seemingly anything that crossed over it. As we emerge out of the tunnel, we're greeted with the view of two bridges. The first being the Galton Bridge, a road bridge that Thomas Telford built out of cast iron. It was completed in 1829 and is now a Grade 1 listed structure. The second bridge is a railway viaduct that was put in a little later in 1860. It's at this point that we leave Route 5. Marked by a little blue sticker on the railings and a millennial milepost, Route 5 takes a right turn and heads up the embankment towards Walsall. But we're going to carry on along the route of the canal towards Wolverhampton, along what is now Route 81 of the National Cycle Network. As we begin to hear the M5 in the distance, we come to a closure of the towpath, due to an unsafe wall. This has been closed for at least 2 years now, and I can't see it ending anytime soon. And it does mean we have to leave the cut for the first time in this journey. So we head up the ramp up to the road above, where we take a right turn and head along the road. As we go under the M5 motorway, we take a left and then follow the old route of the Birmingham Canal, which carries on under the M5 motorway at this point. And then eventually we take another left and head back down to the new Birmingham mainline canal, which we were previously on. It's not an ideal route to take. As you can see here, we've got some wooden hills to negotiate as we go back down to the canal, but hopefully this is a temporary measure and soon we'll be back to just cycling along the towpath. We now need to cross again under the old route of the canal, and then onwards and underneath the M5 motorway. I've crossed over the top of this motorway many times on my way to the southwest, but I've never had this view from below. It's actually quite an impressive structure here as it crosses the Birmingham mainline canal. As you'll know if you've driven this section of motorway, from the M6 junction to junction 3 of the M5, it's entirely elevated as it makes its way through the Sandwell Valley. But from just driving down the motorway, you'd have no idea of the engineering that went into this section when it was built between 1967 and 1970. As we make our way under the bridge, we come into what is known as the Black Country, or at least I've always seen the M5 as the boundary between Birmingham and the Black Country. Let me know if you think different. But it's generally accepted that the Black Country incorporates Walsall, West Brom, Wolverhampton, Sandwell and Dudley, and all the way down to Stourbridge. Although I have heard it said that no two yams will agree on where the Black Country starts and ends. The area was heavily industrialised in the early 1800s, with coal mines, steelworks, iron foundries and brickworks. And the black soot that was produced by these industries covered the area, and this is said to be the origin of the name Black Country, as everything was covered in black soot. It was one of those Black Country iron foundries that cast this bridge here that I'm just going underneath, that I should have actually gone over the top of to cross the canal to carry on Route 81. I quickly realised that I was on the wrong route as I knew I had to follow the main line of the canal, and looking back at my GoPro footage there was a couple of signs that I missed, although these are quite small signs, and that's my excuse and I'm sticking to it. I quickly turned around and made my way over the bridge and headed down the other side of the mainline canal and carried on my journey on Route 81. One of the things that struck me about this route is that it is a green corridor in what is still today a very industrial area. The canal was built to service the heavy industries in the area, bringing in raw materials and taking out finished product. It would have been a hive of activity in the early 1800s, and although today you can still hear and see the factories up against the canal, it's much quieter and provides, in my opinion, a much better route from Birmingham to Wolverhampton than either the Birmingham New Road or the M6, although I must say the train isn't a bad option to go between the two. As we carry on towards Bilston along this incredibly straight section of canal, we come to a bridge which is fairly inconspicuous, but I noticed the name on this bridge was Watery Lane, and that rung a bell. In the BBC One series, Watery Lane was the home of the Shelby family, and it was indeed a real street in Birmingham, but it was actually in the Small Heath area of Birmingham, not here in the Black Country, so it isn't the same lane, but it did remind me of the show, especially as the Peaky Blinders were regular users of the canal network around Birmingham. And staying on the Peaky Blinders theme, a little bit further up the canal, after we've crossed over and gone past the only set of locks on the stretch between Birmingham and Wolverhampton, we come to a junction called Factory Road Junction. This is where the Dudley Canal meets the Birmingham Mainline Canal, and if you were to follow the Dudley Canal, you'd make your way through Dudley, down to Brierley Hill and to Stourbridge. But also you'd pass, not far from here, the Black Country Living Museum, where a lot of scenes from Peaky Blinders were filmed, due to it authentically recreating how life was here back in the early 1900s. At this point I'll be missing a trick if I didn't tell you to subscribe.
By order of the Peaky Blinders.
The channel is now very close to 5,000 subscribers. Subscription to the channel is absolutely free and it's a massive help, so please help me get to that 5,000 milestone by the end of this year. And a reminder that the Komoot and Garmin Connect links to this route are in the video description. And if you want to say thank you for the video or for the route, you can buy me a beer via the link in the description also. Moving on from the Factory Road junction, the canal becomes considerably quieter and also becomes a little bit twistier as we make our way towards Coseley. And it's at Coseley that we come across probably the biggest engineering feat on the canal between Wolverhampton and Birmingham, the Coseley Tunnel. The Coseley Tunnel is 329 metres long and bows its way under Coseley town centre. The tunnel certainly feels a little daunting as you enter it, with water streaming down onto the opposite towpath, and the towpath this side is pretty uneven. However, at least it is dry. There's no lighting in the tunnel, but I must say when I first entered I thought that wouldn't be a problem, as I could see the other end and it seemed quite light as I went in. It wasn't long though before the tunnel became very, very dark towards the centre. This is something I'd definitely recommend using a light for, especially if you're going to do this when it's not full daylight outside. Eventually, as I started to reach the other side of the tunnel, the light began to stream in from the outside, and I did safely make my way through the tunnel without ending up in the canal. So that's what you can expect if you follow the canal and go through the Coseley Tunnel. We continue our way towards Bilston and then on to Wolverhampton city centre. The canal continues to follow a twistier path than it did previously. The canal makes its way past older industrial areas and new housing estates. The skyline of Wolverhampton city centre begins to come into view as we head towards the train station. From here we head under Wensfield Road and towards Wolverhampton city centre, and the end of this first leg of 14 miles between Birmingham and Wolverhampton. From here we're going to carry on along the canal, the last couple of miles before it meets the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal. We're then going to use a couple more canal towpaths before using some quiet lanes to make our way to the outskirts of Telford. From here to Telford it's just under 20 miles, and because there is a bit more road riding in this section, albeit quiet lanes, I've done a magical bike change to my road bike, and that sort of gives away the fact that I haven't actually ridden this route in one go. And this video is a bit of a compilation of other videos that I've done. The entire route is 127 miles, and for me that's not something I could do in one day, especially with some of the hills that we're going to hit when we get to Wales. This would actually make what I think is a great bikepacking journey over 2 days. The first leg from Birmingham to the Welsh border, which is pretty flat and about 70 miles. And then the second leg through Wales, over some mountains and to Barmouth, which is about 60 miles. After passing by Wolverhampton city centre, we begin to descend what seems to be an endless series of locks, some of them with good surfaces like that one, and some of them that become quite narrow and quite bumpy as they go under bridges after the lock. There's no escaping you in an urban area here, as the canal makes its way under an awful lot of road bridges and under a few rail bridges as well, before eventually you make your way to the Stafford Road Bridge. Again, a narrow bumpy path down under the bridge. But as we make our way to the other side, the canal seems to open up a little bit and you feel like there's a bit more breathing space. After descending yet another lock, we get a fantastic view of the Oxley Viaduct. This was built between 1847 and 1849 by Robert Stevenson and William Baker, and it formed part of the line between Birmingham and Shrewsbury. This impressive looking viaduct is Grade 2 listed, and it consists of 12 arches, with the arch that crosses the canal on the skew compared to the other ones, apparently making this viaduct fairly unique. As we continue our journey along this rather pleasant section of canal, there's yet more locks to descend as we make our way to the junction with the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal. There's actually 21 locks on this section of canal. They lower the canal a total of 37 metres over 2 miles, and were part of the original canal built by James Brindley in 1772. Final lock is just before the junction with the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal, where we promptly cross over that canal and take a right turn to continue our journey. The cycle path along the side of the canal here is generally pretty good, although there was one section that again made me question my choice of bike. As I bumped over these drainage ditches and rode through the mud, I did think, should I have bought my mountain bike? but the path is generally quite good, and it's not far up here until we reach the junction of the Staffordshire and Worcestershire Canal and the Shropshire Union Canal. We head over the Shropshire Union Canal and then take a left to follow its course. This canal was quite a latecomer in terms of canals, not being finished until 1835. It was built by the Shropshire Union Canal and Railways Company, hence the name Shropshire Union Canal. It was the last major civil engineering project undertaken by Thomas Telford, so it seems quite appropriate that we're using it to make our way towards the town named in his honour. The surface of the towpath here is really pretty good, until you come to the stretch between the last two bridges. Here it turns into a muddy track, and as I was on my road bike I decided just to skip this and take a detour along the roads. From here on in we're pretty much on the roads all the way to Telford, and the fact that the blue line on the Susterns map was dotted gave me the impression that this may be an unloved part of the network, more of a recommended route than an official part of the network. But I was pleasantly surprised to find that this part of the route through Bwlch and Coseley was extremely well signposted, with rather new looking blue signs at every turn, and I mean literally every turn as we made our way through this residential area. After making another right turn, clearly marked by this signpost, we make our way onto Hushbins Lane and out of this urban area, and onto the type of lanes I'm more used to riding on my road bike. This quiet rural lane will take us most of the way to our next destination on Route 81, Albrighton. As we continue down this road it looked like the good signage was going to carry on, but unfortunately as we take a right turn and then a left turn onto Harriet Hayes Road just before it joins the A41, the signs unfortunately disappeared. I did spot a small sticker directing us right just before I reached the A41, but it certainly wasn't up to the standard that we'd seen in Bwlch and Coseley. This stretch along the A41 is only a short stretch fortunately, because this is an extremely busy road and an extremely fast road, so do take a lot of care if you do plan on coming down here. The route heads into Albrighton under the Birmingham to Shrewsbury Railway, past Albrighton train station and down towards the High Street, where we take a right and head through the centre of the town. As we head out of Albrighton, the signs again improve and we're directed left here, down the side of the A41 on this cycleway, which although not the best in the world, is still much better than cycling on the A41. This cycleway takes us to RAF Cosford. Opened in 1938 as an aircraft maintenance, storage and technical training area. It's named after Cosford Grange House at the southwest of the airfield. It was originally a grass runway here, but during World War II it was upgraded to tarmac. During the war it continued to be used for aircraft maintenance, as well as a base to deliver Spitfire aircraft from to the various places they were needed around the country. We eventually pass under again the Birmingham to Shrewsbury Railway and are greeted with the sight of the runway. As well as the many hangars here, you may also get a sight of the Midlands Air Ambulance, which is based here. A little further down the road is the RAF Cosford Museum. I'd recommend not flying past here, because on the grass outside is a Hawker Hunter. This type of fighter jet served in the RAF from 1956 to 1963 and was used for training purposes right up until the 1980s. The RAF Cosford Museum is a great day out, and it is free entry. The only thing that you have to pay for is parking, so there's some incentive to get on your bike. Moving on from the museum, we again cross the Birmingham to Shrewsbury Railway. The route continues down Neachley Lane as it heads towards Shifnal. There are a couple of short sharp climbs on this section. Nothing substantial by any means, but I think because the route had been so flat up to this point I did notice them. We then join Stanton Road, a much busier road than Neachley Lane, but I was happy to see the signpost there directing us left onto this. This is a fast section of B road that will take us into Shifnal, fortunately only about a mile away from here. There's nothing too much exciting to see in Shifnal. Not that it's a bad place, but we're directed away from the centre around residential streets. We leave Shifnal using Horton Lane, which after a short climb widens and flattens out as it makes its way to junction 4 of the M54. It's worth noting that the National Cycle Network Route 81 has changed here recently, and there is a sign still directing us right here, which has changed due to a new housing development on the edge of Telford. We need to carry on straight between the M54 and the services. From the end of this road we join a traffic-free section, which takes us around the M54 island and upwards into the area known as Priorslee, where we officially enter Telford.
Welcome to Telford New Town.
Continuing up Castle Farm Way, named after the farm that previously occupied this area, we pass by some housing estates under construction. Or if you're watching this in a couple of years' time, we pass by some new houses. We take a very well signposted left turn and head up a cycle path which takes us through the centre of Priorslee. This cycle path, with the exception of a small piece of quiet road that we need to use, takes us to where Route 81 crosses the A5. From here, Route 81 heads through the area of St George's on the road. To avoid having to cycle on the road, I'm going to head down Route 55. I'm then going to follow this cycle path through Rockadine Wood to meet up again with Route 81 in Trench. After cycling the short bit of Route 55 downhill, we can follow Rockadine Wood Way until we get to this small turn off, which has signs directing us back to Route 81. It is a little bit of road riding, but it's a very quiet residential street. We then cross over the A442 and back onto Route 81. After following the twists and turns of Route 81, all well signposted, we make our way to Trench Lock Interchange. Unsurprisingly, this is named Trench Lock due to the fact there used to be a canal lock here. This was part of the Shrewsbury Canal, which ran from Shrewsbury to Coalport. And on this last leg of our journey towards Shrewsbury, we are going to crisscross the canal a couple of times, and we're also going to follow the old route of it as we get to Shrewsbury. I'm going to leave Route 81 again here, it goes off there to the left, but I'm going to continue along the A442, as it has cycle paths leading along the edge of it, all the way to the edge of Telford. Route 81 does follow cycle paths through the areas of Montgomery and into Wellington, but then as you pass around Wellington, there's a fair bit of road riding on quite busy roads, so I think this is a better route to stay on traffic-free routes as much as possible. A little later on as well, we also get to ride down an old railway line, which if you've watched the channel before, you'll know is something that I love. In Shawbirch, the cycle path does end unfortunately, so we need to cycle a few hundred metres along this road before we're able to turn left onto a cycle path which follows the route of an old railway. And although this is not part of the National Cycle Network, there are some blue signs here directing us back to Route 81, which this will link up with on the edge of Wellington. This disused line is the old Wellington to Market Drayton Railway, which was opened in 1862. It ran from Wellington to Market Drayton obviously, and then had connecting lines towards Nantwich and Crewe, and also over to Stoke. It was never a particularly busy line, with it running through some rather rural areas, and passenger traffic ceased in 1963, with freight traffic ending in 1967. After a mile or so, the route brings us onto Route 81 again, at Rockadine Road, just on the edge of Wellington, and also the edge of Telford. From here we're back on Route 81, which we'll be following along the next leg of our journey towards Shrewsbury. The route meanders through quiet lanes as it makes its way to the edge of Shrewsbury, and then follows a cycle path along the side of the Shrewsbury Canal, before making its way into the centre of Shrewsbury. Here we pass under the Birmingham to Shrewsbury Railway. This would have joined up with the disused line that we've just left. When we get to the village of Rockadine, we need to take a right turn to continue through the village and on Route 81. This is marked with one of the National Cycle Network blue signs, but I did find when we left the village a couple of the turn-ins weren't marked. That goes the same for this whole route between Telford and Shrewsbury. Some of it is well signposted and some of it is not so well posted, so I would make sure you either know where you're going or you have the route downloaded to your phone or cycle computer. I'm going to put a link to this ride in the description of the video if you want to follow it. The village of Rockadine sits on top of a small hill, so when leaving the village I did get some great views of the Shropshire countryside, with Hormond Hill directly in front of us, and even further in the distance Middletown Hill, which marks the border between England and Wales. After passing through the village of Charlton, and once again under the Birmingham to Shrewsbury Railway, we come through the village of Bwlch, and the spot where Route 81 crosses the River Tern. There's a lot going on at this river crossing. Just before the bridge, the River Rodin joins the River Tern, and they make their final journey down to the River Severn not too far away. There's a modern sluice just slightly upstream. This was built in the 60s to keep the river level high for the All Scott sugar beet factory just upstream from here. It was also the site of a corn mill that actually operated all the way back from 1100 AD until 1962. After crossing the river, a little further down we take a left turn and make our way towards the village of Withington, carrying on along these lovely quiet lanes. In the village of Withington, we cross over the route of the old Shrewsbury Canal again. Here you can see there's a bridge, but absolutely no sign of the canal in the fields and the garden that it used to run through. The canal closed in stages, but was fully abandoned by 1944. In 1963, the canal network was transferred to British Waterways, and much of the Shrewsbury Canal was sold off and destroyed. From here it's another couple of miles to the village of Upton Magna. We next pass through the village of Upton Magna, with this lovely old-fashioned sign in the middle, telling us that we have 5 miles to go along Route 81 towards Shrewsbury, and also we're crossing over Route 45 of the National Cycle Network here. As we head towards Uffington, we do have a little bit of a gradient as we make our way around the edge of Hormond Hill. Hormond Hill is run by the Forestry Commission and does have some great walking routes for children. At this point you also get a great view of the South Shropshire Hills in the distance. Just before we get to Uffington, we pass over the Shrewsbury Canal again, although to be honest you wouldn't know unless you looked from the air. We then have this road, which is 30 miles an hour, that we have to follow for a short distance before we'll turn off to the left and join the route of the old Shrewsbury Canal. We'll follow this for a short while as we make our way towards Shrewsbury Centre. The canal path does start out as tarmac, but there are some gravel sections as it makes its way towards Shrewsbury. Although to be honest, even on my road bike, the surface was absolutely fine, I had no problem traversing it. There is a little more road riding as we make our way through a residential street, and then onto the beautiful tree-lined Sydney Avenue, as we make our way to Shrewsbury Weir. The weir was built in 1909, simply to keep the water level high enough around Shrewsbury, so boats could use it all year round. From here we're going to be following the River Severn towards Crowey Park. We go under the railway bridge, which essentially has Shrewsbury Station above it. As you can see, it's quite large, and then also cross under the English Bridge before making our way into Crowey Park and the final bit of our journey to Shrewsbury. The park can be quite busy, especially at weekends, so make sure you've got a bell and do look out for people that are walking through. And also look out for the statue of Hercules, which could be found on your left, as we make our way towards where we'll cross the River Severn at the Port Hill Suspension Bridge. This carries Route 81 over the River Severn as it makes its way west out of Shrewsbury towards Wales. The bridge was opened in 1923 and replaced a ferry service that used to operate here. And although this is part of Route 81 of the National Cycle Network, cyclists are asked to dismount as they cross the bridge, and by the looks of how busy it is, this makes perfect sense. A good proportion of our journey through Shrewsbury is along traffic-free cycle paths, but after crossing the Port Hill Suspension Bridge, we need to make our way up Woodfield Avenue, this residential street, before we take a right onto Shelton Road and the safety again of a traffic-free cycle path. Shrewsbury actually has quite a good network of both traffic-free and on-road cycle paths. When we get to the area of Shelton, unfortunately the cycle path ends and we need to join the busy B4380. This part of the road used to be part of the A5, and in the early 1800s Thomas Telford used it to form part of his Holyhead Road project, the construction of which started in 1815 after an Act of Parliament decided that we needed a better road running from London to Holyhead, where ferries left to Dublin Island. Thomas Telford designed and built many toll houses along the route, designed to be able to collect the funds for the upkeep of the road. This particular bend used to have a toll house on it, but in the 1970s when the road was widened, unfortunately the toll house had to be removed. Fortunately though, it was decided that the toll house had historic value, and so instead of being bulldozed, it was taken apart piece by piece and rebuilt at Bliss Hill Museum in Telford. It still stands there to this day, so feel free to take a visit to Bliss Hill, just off Route 55 of the National Cycle Network in Madeley, Telford. This section of the route between Shelton and Montford Bridge, as it passes through the village of Bicton, is one of the busier road sections of this route. Most of this stretch is a 60-mile-an-hour limit, and there are a fair few cars on it. But it only lasts for a couple of miles before we make our way to Montford Bridge and cross over the River Severn for the second time in this journey. Montford Bridge was finished in 1792 and was designed by, again, that man, Thomas Telford. The bridge is constructed from red sandstone, and this was obtained from Nestcliff Hill, just 4 miles away. Just after crossing the bridge, we take a left to continue our journey towards Welshpool, which we're told is 23 miles away. And from here we cross over the modern A5, built in the 1990s, to replace the stretch of road that we've just come down. The first village that we pass through is Montford, not to be confused with Montford Bridge. And as we come into the village, we pass the church of St Chad's. Now this is interesting because in the graveyard here, you can find the graves of Susanna and Robert Darwin, the parents of undoubtedly the most famous person to be born in Shrewsbury, Charles Darwin. From Montwood we continue on these quiet rural lanes, seemingly left behind in time, as we make our way to the next village of Shrawardine. As we come into Shrawardine, we find the remains of Shrawardine Castle. This castle was built by the Normans, following their invasion of England in 1066. It was built here to defend an important river crossing over the River Severn, and during its time it served not only as an important defensive point to defend against the Welsh, but also a gathering point for forces going into Wales from England.
Well, England against Wales, a pot that needs no further ingredient.
The castle was finally destroyed in 1645, while it was held by the Royalists in the English Civil War. It held out for 5 days before surrender, and after that the parliamentary forces destroyed the castle, and stone from the castle was taken to help rebuild the walls of nearby Shrewsbury. As we continue on through the village of Shrawardine, we pass some beautiful thatched buildings, and at the bottom of the village we come to a very interestingly named cottage, and I'm going to take a wild guess that this is the crossing point that Shrawardine Castle was built to defend. However, today there is no ferry here, so we need to carry on to find a bridge over the Severn. Route 81 carries on to the village of Wilcot Marsh, where we take a left which is clearly signposted, and carry on our journey up this quiet rural lane until we make it to Nestcliff Training Camp. Nestcliff Training Area was originally an ammunition dump during World War II. The area was chosen due to its rural location, making it less susceptible to air raids. The area also lay on the route of the old Shropshire and Montgomeryshire Railway, also known as the Potts Line. The line ran from Abbey Foregate in Shrewsbury over to Llanymynech across the Welsh border. The line first opened in 1866, but was never particularly successful, with the line suffering multiple closures and reopenings during its life. It was revived to serve the ammunition depot here during World War II, but eventually closed down completely in 1960, and much of the track and the infrastructure was ripped up. Following World War II, the ammunition depot here also became surplus to requirements, and was closed down, and the site turned into this training area that we see today. One oddity about the Nestcliff training area is that the MOD spell Nestcliff without an E, whereas the nearby village of Nestcliff is spelt with an E on the end. I'm not quite sure why this is, and if anybody knows, please do let me know in the comments. In the village of Pentre, we take a left turn, again very well signposted, and carry on our journey towards the village of Melverley. There is a few twists and turns as we make our way along this very rural section of the route. I've got the route downloaded onto my Garmin. It's an older model, but it does the job and is directing me nicely towards the village of Melverley. From Melverley, we're going to pick up a disused rail line to make our way across the River Severn and into Wales. And although it may not be immediately apparent, this is where we actually join the old railway line. And it's not that track immediately in front of us, it's actually the road that bends round to the right that is the old rail line. There's not a lot of clues around here that this was an old rail line, but the line used to follow the row of hedging in the middle of the shot here, as it came down to this point and curved round to the right before it crossed the River Severn. This is where we are now, just outside Melverley, and you can clearly see the curve on the road as it crosses the River Severn and goes into the village of Crew Green, and this is all an old section of railway. So we're going to carry on along Route 81 and this road that follows the route of the old railway and head into Wales. I mentioned earlier the old rail line that ran through the Nestcliff training area, the Shropshire and Montgomery line that ran from Shrewsbury to Llanymynech. And this route that we're on now was part of that railway system. It was actually a small branch line that ran from Kinnelly, through Melverley, across the river and to Criggion, and it was built to move stone from the quarry at Criggion back to Shrewsbury. This branch line was opened in 1871, a few years after the original line between Shrewsbury and Llanymynech was opened. It suffered the same fate as the main line, opening and closing a few times over the years, and eventually closing for good in 1960. The bridge over the River Severn is one of the most substantial parts of the railway to survive, although this isn't the original bridge. When the railway was built, it was built on a budget, and this was originally what was described as a very rickety wooden viaduct. And in 1902, the viaduct collapsed into the river. It was rebuilt again in 1912 using a mishmash of parts, again on a budget, and by 1920 the bridge had been declared unsafe and was put out of use. The Ministry of Defence repaired the bridge during World War II so it could be used in the war effort. However, again in 1947 the bridge had to be rebuilt to what we see today. It closed to train traffic in 1960 and was opened as a road bridge in 1962. At this point the border of England and Wales is in the centre of the bridge. So, welcome to Wales. The road continues along the old railway line until we get to Crew Green, where the road and Route 81 turns to the left and this disused rail line carries on straight ahead. I had a quick look down this track to see if I could see anything that was left of the railway, and as you can see, some of the old gateposts here are made of old railway sleepers, and you can see somewhat of an embankment as the track continues into this farm. But really that's about it. You probably wouldn't know there was a railway here unless you were told. From here, Route 81 takes us through Crew Green, as we take a right onto the busy B4393. This is where we leave the National Cycle Network and carry on towards Barmouth along some slightly busier roads. It's not long before on the left we get a good view of the Bridon Hills, and on the top of this hill you can see Rodney's Pillar. This was to commemorate Admiral Rodney's victory over the French in 1782, because there's nothing more than the British like than a monument to celebrate a victory over the French. It's built here because the oak to build Admiral Rodney's fleet was taken from here and shipped down the River Severn to Bristol where the boats were built. And speaking of the River Severn, it's not long before we're crossing it again, but this time we are staying in Wales. Crossover on the Llandrinio Bridge. This was completed in 1775 and designed by John Gwynn from just down the road in Shrewsbury. If you can hear the wind in this video, I hope you'll have sympathy for me, because it is unfortunately a headwind, and as I'm going in one direction pretty much the whole way to Barmouth, I will be fighting this the whole way. And if I can play for sympathy a little bit more, the weather conditions as I cross the River Vyrnwy into a town which I'm not going to try and pronounce, but another one that begins with a double L, were not particularly favourable. I'm not sure how much the GoPro conveys the weather here, but it was a very heavy shower. That water dripping off my arms is not sweat. The shower did pass, and the weather did dry up, and it wasn't far from here, where I began to see the hills rising up in front of me. Unfortunately, the wind did not ease up, and I was still battling against it. I was also starting to battle against the gradient, as the first serious climb in this ride approached, peaking at 1100 feet, just before Lake Vyrnwy. The climb really started to kick in after the village of Llanfillin, when I turned left onto the B4393. This section of road was extremely beautiful, as I made my way up a valley, edging closer towards Lake Vyrnwy. But before I got there I had to summit this 1100 foot peak, and my legs were really starting to burn on this section of road. I planned this route out on Garmin Connect, And to be fair to Garmin, it did warn me with these 3 purple markers that there were some steep gradients here, before reaching the summit of this climb, just a couple of miles away from Lake Vyrnwy. My legs were hurting so badly that I even started grunting at one point. I did eventually make it to the top of this climb, and then got to enjoy the 1 mile descent down, including a hairpin bend, before the final short climb up to Lake Vyrnwy. The final mile before Lake Vyrnwy was a gentle ascent that wound its way up to the top of the dam. To get here, I've battled through headwind, I've battled through rain, and I've battled up some steep gradients. But it was all worth it when I got here because the view of Lake Vyrnwy is absolutely stunning. I visited Lake Vyrnwy last year for the first time and knew that I had to come back here cycling. Initially I had the idea that I'd just cycle around the lake, which is about 10 miles and makes for a great family bike ride. And I'll just let you enjoy the view for a moment from the top of the dam. The dam here was finished in 1888 and is constructed of solid Welsh granite. The dam's 44 metres high and was built to supply water to the city of Liverpool. After the dam was finished, the old village of Llanwydden was flooded in the valley behind the dam. Apparently, if the water does get low, you can still see remains of this village today. The route takes me right over the dam itself to the other side of the lake. Over here you'll find toilets and a cafe. So I stopped here to take a break, recharge and enjoy the views, before carrying on my journey around the south side of the lake. I absolutely love cycling around this part of the lake. Firstly because it was really flat compared to what I'd just been cycling, and secondly because the views were absolutely gorgeous. Every now and again you get a view through the trees of the mountains and of the lake. You'll also pass over many small streams and rivers that flow into the lake, and many of these have waterfalls as they make their final descent down into Lake Vyrnwy. After just a few short miles around the lake, it was time to turn left and make my way away from the lake and up this mountain climb. Or that was the plan at least, until I came across this rather large tree blocking the road just a few hundred metres up from the lake. That is a very substantial tree blocking my way up this mountain. I ended up having to climb over the tree with my bike, which was a little bit tricky. But the good news is I have been back since I filmed this video and the tree has been moved, so you can carry on along this route unimpeded, which is great because it was quite hard work making my way over this tree and it did take my breath away somewhat. After I'd caught my breath I did indeed carry on up this pass, although it wasn't long before I'd quickly ran out of breath. This road rises about 900 feet from Lake Vyrnwy, up to an elevation of 1,788 feet, that's 545 metres above sea level. And the thing that kept me going on this climb was knowing that I was going back down to sea level. From the top of this pass, the route is predominantly downhill. The breaks that I took along the way up this climb allowed me to take in the beautiful scenery that this valley provided as I made my way up it. As I got towards the top of the valley and officially entered Snowdonia National Park, the scenery became what I would call bleak yet beautiful. When we get the right weather in the UK, there really are some stunning places to ride, and this has got to be up there with the best. I soon approached a junction where I needed to turn right to make the final short ascent to the top of this pass. As I turned right, I noticed that on my right hand side was a cross. This cross gives this pass its name, Bwlch Groes, which in English is Pass of the Cross. A cross has been here since medieval times, as this was a pilgrim's route from North Wales down to St David's in the south, and the pilgrims put this here to give comfort to lonely travellers as they made their way through. As a lonely bike rider making my way over this pass, comfort is something I could have done with, but more importantly I think I needed more oxygen and a few less pounds. However, I did make it to the top and was greeted with absolutely stunning views of the Welsh mountains. It was only once I got up here and read the information board that I found out that this is actually the highest mountain pass in North Wales, standing at 1,788 feet above sea level, or 445 metres. The information board also informed me that in the 1920s and 1930s this pass was regularly used by Austin's test drivers to test their cars. Time to enjoy what I've earned climbing the other side of this pass. This road drops 1,200 feet in about 5 miles, as it makes its way down the mountain to the southern end of Lake Bala. This definitely was a welcome relief from all the climbing in the first half of this ride. But it wasn't time to relax. This was quite a tricky descent with some steep drops on the left hand side, hence the barriers as you can see. Although not much pedalling was required down this stretch of road, my concentration needed to be up and my hands firmly on the brakes. With this being a winding single track road, there wasn't much chance to really let the bike fly. I rarely let the speed go above about 30 miles an hour, as the view ahead simply wasn't good enough, even though the view ahead of the valley was pretty stunning. This road eventually ends at a T-junction, where I took a left and headed through the town of Llanuwchllyn. From here we take a left onto the A494. This is the main road that runs between Bala and Dolgellau. This is a fast busy A road, but as the road follows a valley on its way to Dolgellau, there's not a lot of other choices to take, unless you want to do a lot more climbing. But I did find this single track road, not far from Llanuwchllyn, which allowed me to have about 1.5 miles of quiet riding, before having to rejoin the busy A road. From Llanuwchllyn I was going uphill again for about 3 miles. This was fairly gentle and compared to the mountain pass I'd just gone over, it didn't feel too bad at all. After that small climb it's a nice gentle descent all the way to Dolgellau. Not a massive amount to say about this section of the ride, but the car geek in me did get to enjoy this little beauty passing. Car nerds, if you know what that is, let me know in the comments. There's also some natural beauty on this part of the ride, as Cadair Idris comes into view at the end of the valley. Just a couple of miles out from Dolgellau, I took another detour onto a smaller road. This was the final climb of the ride, and involved a couple of hairpin bends as I made my way up the side of the valley. This was worth it as I got a great view of Dolgellau in the bottom of the valley and the mountains surrounding it. From here I made my final descent down into Dolgellau, and then over the river Mawddach and into the centre of the town. From the bridge I was able to enjoy some great views of the river Mawddach. This is the river I'll be following to make the last part of this journey towards Barmouth. The Mawddach Trail, which forms part of Route 8 of the National Cycle Network, goes from this car park here all the way into Barmouth. Unfortunately for me, it follows the route of an old railway line, so it's really very flat as it makes the final 10 miles of my journey to Barmouth. The majority of this section has this gravel hardpack surface. If I was only doing this part of the ride, I definitely wouldn't have chosen my road bike. Although it was perfectly possible to ride on this with it, as you can see, it definitely wasn't the most comfortable, and I would have preferred a mountain bike or a hybrid on this. With the Canal towpaths at the start of the ride, I think the ideal bike for this entire ride from Birmingham to Barmouth would definitely be some sort of gravel bike. This is a stunningly beautiful part of the National Cycle Network, and one that definitely deserves its own video. The closer you get to Barmouth, the more the views open up, and in the distance you're able to see the Barmouth Railway Bridge, which I'll be making my way across for the final part of this ride. I did get caught in another rainstorm, and the headwind at this point coming off the sea was extremely strong, but none of that could dampen my spirits as I made my way onto the Barmouth Railway Bridge. This bumpy wooden surface certainly wasn't suited to being on a road bike, but from the bridge you can enjoy fantastic views of Barmouth Harbour and the Mawddach estuary. The bridge was completed in 1867 for the Aberystwyth and Welsh Coast Railway. It's 820 metres long. Because of the harsh conditions it's exposed to here, it's undergone a lot of restoration work in its time, including a 6-month period starting in 1985. Leaving the bridge I took a left turn and headed on the road towards Barmouth town centre, the end point of this ride at the beach. And when we get to the beach, we've finished this 127-mile ride all the way from Birmingham to the Mid Wales coast at Barmouth. This is a fantastic route and perfect for bikepacking. As I said earlier in the video, I think it would be great to cycle from Birmingham to somewhere around the Welsh border on day 1, and then day 2 make your way across Wales to here, the finish point at Barmouth. And there is a train service from Barmouth back to Birmingham should you need it. Thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed the video, please do give it a like and subscribe to the channel. It's absolutely free and helps massively. You'll find the route links to the route in the video description, both for Komoot and Garmin Connect. And if you want to say thank you for those or for the video, you can also buy me a beer via the link in the description also. Thank you very much for watching and happy cycling.